clearly they have their own place among the best of the best, and I don't think there's any question about that. And I think that was the case, after that fourth Super Bowl loss. But that era, that '90s era, before the '90s closed out, if you were just being sober and logical, that's where you put him. Now,
this episode of Nuff Said with Bob Koshinski is sponsored by Chef's Famous Italian Restaurant, home of the Spaghetti Parm, and located at 291 Seneca Street in Buffalo. Today's topic: where do the Buffalo Bills Super Bowl teams of the 1990s rank in the annals of NFL history? With NFL insider Vic Carucci.
Welcome back to another edition of Nuff Said with yours truly, Bob Koshinski. And this program is going to be a little bit different because we're not going to talk about the present Buffalo Bills, but Vic, you're one of a handful of guys who are still living to be able to talk about the Super Bowl Bills.
Right,
and I'm one of the other ones. There are a couple. And when I talk to my sons and I talk to my nephews who are younger, you can't really even discuss, obviously, the Bills of the early 90s because they just, they were 3-4 years old, whatever they were. And oftentimes, over the course of time, myths are generated about a team. Mm-hmm. So what I want to kind of get into today with you, because you know as well, if not more than anybody, just how great were the Bills' 4 years of Super Bowl participation. Jim Kelly talks about it. You can see it. They've been, people have grown in the respect for that team. In the 90s, it was almost kind of a joke, by the national scribes and whatever, when they would refer to the Bills, oh, they're losers. Now people have come to appreciate exactly what a Herculean task that was to win 4 consecutive AFC championships. So, Vic, in your mind, you know all those guys personally. You were there for the Hall of Fames. You participated in that. Where should that team rank among NFL teams over the past, 6 decades?
Yeah, well, I clearly they have their own place among the best of the best, and I don't think there's any question about that. And I think that was the case, after that fourth Super Bowl loss. But that era, that '90s era, before the '90s closed out, if you were just being sober and logical, that's where you put him. Now, was it an instant? And this is the interesting part to me. Was it an instant recognition beyond us, beyond Western New York, beyond the people who were closest to it? And it took a while, I think, to get the national appreciation for this team. And I'll start with this. Being a voter for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, sitting in those meeting rooms through the time that the members of those Super Bowl teams, their candidacy would come up as modern era players, listening to the discussions there, that's when the appreciation started to grow. From what I could hear from the other and most of the panelists who vote for the Hall of Fame are media members throughout the country, and there's a rep for each city, for each team, I should say, each of the 32 teams, but also at-large members, and now there's some sitting Pro Football Hall of Famers on that committee: Bill Polian, James Lofton, Tony Dungy, Dan Fouts, and they're also panelists now. They also have media, media responsibilities. So they've got a perspective that goes beyond what they did as players, coaches, or general managers. But before even they got in the room, Bob, when it was again a stricter media panel, I could hear the discussion when Jim Kelly's candidacy came up, when Andre Reed's candidacy came up. Now, Bruce Smith, there were some no-brainers. Thurman Thomas, really no-brainers because of their historic.
But Thurman didn't make it the first year,
right?
Which to me is still an outrage to me. But anyway,
you can look at it any way you want, but I'm telling you, the discussions, just because a guy doesn't get in doesn't mean the discussion that led to him getting in wasn't one that gave you the sense that he's a Hall of Famer. He just doesn't make it this time around. And it's not about who you're keeping out. It's always about who you're putting in. So what I'm telling you is the wave of discussions, the positive vibes that were there about these players and those teams, what those teams did to keep going back to back to back, that's where it grew. And then you had the documentaries that would emerge, like The Four Falls of Buffalo. And I got a lot of time in that with ESPN. Steve Tasker and I kind of did this narration thing, the way they set it up, and it was when I didn't, until you see the finished product, you don't appreciate what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do is tell you, this is a sad story, but not a story of failure. And I think that's where the public, and I've gotten this kind of feedback from people who have seen that and have rewatched it, not just Bills fans, just people who say, this enlightened me about what that team really was about. And so all of those things, the quality, and again, Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame GM, Hall of Fame owner, Hall of Fame players, those labels matter because that tells you what this team was comprised of. Beyond that, there was a revolutionary approach to things with the K-Gun no-huddle offense. That was special. That defined that era. How Jim Kelly ran that, how Andre and James, Don Beebe, and this whole crew, and the O-line, and moving at that pace, and having the Raiders on their heels, and in that AFC Championship game, the blowout, and then the mountains that they climbed to get back there, the comeback game against Houston and so forth, and overcoming along the way those injuries. Jim getting hurt the first one and missing time. Frank Reich doing what he had to do to get them keep the path going when it looked like it was all over, along with Thurman, Thurman being hurt, Cornelius being hurt. There's a list of those. Back to the appreciation of the rest of the country, because that's really what it was. So I think at the end of it all, this team had so much talent that it couldn't screw it up. It did get screwed up in the Super Bowl game, but the body of work that those 4 consecutive years, and that's yet another point to make, how we're not ever seeing that again. I don't think that'll happen again, where you just keep going back to back to back to back.
The Chiefs came close.
They came close, and then you look at what they've done, how hard it is to stay good, and they're finding that out. Maybe, and again, the other opposite side of this is, had the Bills won any of those Super Bowls, but especially say the first or possibly 2 in a row, would they have been sustainable to go to 4? Because that changes things.
Well, and back then they had Plan B, right? It wasn't the free agency.
It wasn't unfettered free agency, no.
And the first guy they lost, if I remember, was Wolford.
Correct.
Went to the Colts.
Indianapolis.
I'm impressing myself that I even can remember this stuff. But Polian had to deal with that, and that was the beginning of trying to move your chess pieces around. But, and this is what I want to kind of bring up to you, because I think you had to live those 4 years and cover the team and experience those players and in the locker room and everything else. People often say, well, they should have won that first one, but then after that, well, to me, after that, the pressure mounted, and it became so intolerable. That 4th Super Bowl, they're up by a touchdown at the half. They come out, Thurman fumbles the football. Well, Kelly throws him the shovel pass. He gets the ball knocked out. Dallas picks it up. They return it for a touchdown to tie the score. But on the Bills bench, it was as if they had already lost. That the pressure of them having lost 3 previous to that, I think just became, it wasn't in the AFC Championship games. That was familiar territory. They had succeeded there. And they won at home. They won on the road. You mentioned the year that Frank Reich came in. That was incredible. They had got pummeled by Houston,
in
They
the
had
regular
at
season.
Houston
Yeah.
in the Astrodome. Houston comes to Buffalo. They're up, 30-some points. Frank Reich and Thurman's not in the game, and Bennett's not in the game, and there's this miraculous comeback. Then the next week, they go to the number 1 seed, and they beat Pittsburgh with Frank Reich as quarterback.
Right.
And then they beat Miami and Dan Marino in Miami in the AFC Championship game. Then they get to, the Rose Bowl, and the first time they play Dallas, and Kelly gets hurt, Ken Hull gets hurt. Those are things people don't discuss anymore. They lost their starting quarterback, and almost as important, their starting center, who made all those line calls with the no huddle.
Yeah, no, there were some extenuating circumstances, but I do think the overarching one, you nailed it, is the feeling of pressure. Bill Polian talked about this too, is the amount of questions that you're going to get when you get in front of that national stage. And even though you would believe that they were used to it because they'd been there, used to seeing a much larger media gaggle than they had on a regular basis in Buffalo. And it would, incrementally increase. I think that first Super Bowl was an eye-opener in so many ways of how all of a sudden at one Bills drive, the media room is now swelling with people where it had pretty much been a defined group. And now it's okay, this person's here from all these different, and there were more newspapers sending people on the road to cover with budgets and so forth, as in addition to TVs and TV outlets and network outlets, and the feeling themselves, feeling that they wanted, and to some degree there was this. I think players looking around the rest of the league and saying, gee, we're doing all this stuff. Shouldn't we be even more prominent nationally? Oh, I know why we're not. We play in Buffalo. There's sort of like this feel. I mean, I heard that. I'm sure you did too. And I think some of the focus would get lost along the way. And yes, some of the focus, some of the concentration of football was overshadowed by the distraction of attention and or lack thereof, or whatever it might be. Who is the straw that stirs the drink? The whole Thurman thing that resulted when he was upset about that and doesn't show up for a Super Bowl media session, and I got an earful from Bill Polian on that, because I was, an officer of the Pro Football Writers of America. The PFWA was, had made sure the league fined Thurman for missing that. I forget, I think it was $10,000, something like that, because that was an obligation, and he didn't show up for it. And all that did was intensify those feelings of negativity, because you still also had a lot of media that said, why are we dealing with these guys again? It wasn't unlike the Broncos returning to when they were kind of on their run and then having disastrous Super Bowls follow, the Dan Reeves, John Elway Broncos.
Yeah, John Elway and the Broncos were in that same category until he came back late in his career and won. He won what, 2 Super Bowls, right?
Back to back, yeah.
There were some Hall of Fame egos on that team. There's
Absolutely.
no doubt. And it's gratifying to me to see these guys as brothers now, because they were jockeying for position in that locker room for, airtime and national, deals. And, and Thurman was near the top of that list, and Bruce was near the top of that list, and Andre was near the top of that list.
Yeah.
And and I get it. I mean, it was a different time. I don't know how much, today they talk about, and I know Bean and I'm sure McDermott, they're so into the character of the players. And you can see that on this current Bills team. They don't have those guys who are like raising their hands saying, hey, what about me? What about me? At least we haven't really seen that. Back then, and I did, 1 year I did the Jim Kelly show. For 2 years I did the Thurman Thomas show. For 1 year I did the Cornelius Bennett show. And I bring that up, aside from the fact I was obviously an outstanding television co-host.
The best.
I wasn't even a co-host with those guys. I throw it to commercial. But the minute one of them could not or did not want to do the next year, there were guys standing in line waiting to do a television show.
Sure.
I mean, they all they knew who was getting what. Now, nobody was getting rich doing television, but they were getting airtime.
Yeah.
They were getting promotion. They were getting publicity. But because that team had those egos, they were winners. I mean, maybe they didn't win the ultimate game, but they knew how to hit that second gear in those playoffs leading up to that.
Sure. Again, immensely talented football players. You bring up the egos, and I'll add to this, because it was a different time for me as a person, and I'm a contemporary with a lot of those guys, that were on that team. Jim Richer and different. I mean, Kent, and God rest his soul. I mean, he I thought in many ways was a grounding presence for that group.
Yes.
As much as he could be, as much as anyone could be. And again, you think of other names that weren't Pete Metzelaars, that weren't the superstars, Phil Hansen, different guys. And there was a part of me that that I want to phrase this the right way, but you're kind of growing up together. Like you're now, unlike being around the current team where those kids are younger than my own
kids.
children.
Yeah.
They're literally my own kids are older than these kids, and it's a whole different perspective. You look at everything differently. Then you looked at it in the kind of the same vein of not identifying as a player, but identifying as a person on this ride. And I had a couple of them say now, like, hey, you were part of this. And I yes, I absolutely felt part of it. I wasn't a rooting interest of the team. That's not the way
No, but you were
to
a
do the
familiar
job.
face.
But I was around it.
Yeah.
You would see these people, these players, these coaches, these everybody, more than your own family during the course of the season.
Right.
Spent more time at One Bills Drive. Day would start early and end late, and those kids that I'm talking about who are now adults with kids of their own, or grandchildren, they'd be at school night. They're in bed by the time I got home. I had to give them the wake up kind of kiss goodnight, and felt guilty as heck because you're not around for a lot of stuff or homework helping and all that. And when a team is as good as that one was, the demands of, in my case, working for the Buffalo News, doing the extra things of media shows with you, shows on WBEN with John Murphy, those things were, you could understand sort of the headiness that would be involved, and then the national demands would come into play. Now you had all the networks wanting a piece of what this team was. O.J. Simpson was with NBC, and I remember on the precipice of the Bills teams making their run, he'd check in regularly for information, and his researcher, his producer on the Bills checked in with me, and then would come to town, and they did a sit down, I know, with the late Larry Felser and I. And it was in Larry's backyard, an interview to talk about the Bills. That's how it was growing. Or ABC was doing something because they were covering a playoff game, and then you find yourself, you say, how could it not affect how these guys are doing things, right, when I'm just that much of it? And it was crazy. Yeah.
I'm going to give some praise to Belichick and Parcells for the first Super Bowl win, because there was just a week between games, which has, I don't know if it ever happened after that again. Maybe once after that, but I'm not sure. But it was odd. Usually you get the 2 weeks.
No, it was definitely
the Bills were coming off the highest of highs. They'd already beaten the Giants in the Meadowlands.
Right.
And they were solid favorites to win the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, in a very short week, Belichick and Parcells came up with a great game plan defensively to handle the no huddle. And then you got Hostetler, your backup quarterback, and they had already beaten San Francisco, who was the returning Super Bowl champs, right, on the road. That was a great piece of coaching to have knocked off the 49ers, and then the Bills coming off their biggest win in their team history.
Well, I'll tell you a lot of backstories about that, about what you're referencing with the Giants and their preparation for this game and the game planning. of course, the game plan that Bill Belichick put together is in Canton, right, in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But it was, I want to say it was Carl Banks of that Giants defense told me the story that when Bill, and they looked at Bill at that time. Bill Belichick wasn't Bill Belichick. He was this. They were still trying to feel him out as this coach. Like, what does he really know? He wasn't an NFL player. He was a guy that is. And Parcells was this giant personality, right. And then now Belichick is the defensive guy with a defensive-oriented head coach. But Belichick is got his group together, and Banks said when we're sitting in that meeting room and he's telling us we're going to let Thurman Thomas run for 100 plus. He's going to have about 150 yards rushing, or whatever the number he used, and we're going to win the game. And he said every player in that room looked at him like he was insane. Like, what are you trying to tell us? And that's what he was trying to tell him. You're going to let him get his yards. That's not going to win the game. What you're not going to do is let Jim Kelly, the K-Gun offense, do their thing. And you're going to smack the daylights out of every receiver that comes off. You're going to trust the fact that pass interference isn't going to be called, and you're going to mug people. And Thurman and Andre. And others did get those hits and did take it wasn't what you knew, that offense that was rolling the week before against the Raiders. All of a sudden, it's a slow play kind of grinded out game. And to see O.J. Anderson of the Giants be the MVP of that game told you everything you needed to know.
Well, and as much as the Belichick plan should be in the Hall of Fame, it was the Giants' ability to control the ball and keep Kelly in the team. Because I think the Bills were out there for 19 minutes, and they scored
19 points.
Yeah, so, you go back to those. I will say this: when the Bills arrived in Tampa on Monday night, after so they win Sunday, they destroy the Raiders 51-3. And Monday night, they show up at Tampa. We're all there at the outside of the hotel. And I will say this openly. There were several players. I don't know. I mean, we didn't do breathalyzer, but a number of players got off that bus. They were still drunk. They had been celebrating from the night before because they were so overwhelmingly good against the Raiders. And I hear the stories, and I tell everybody they're not true. Nobody was out drinking the night before the game. Bill Polian had those guys locked up.
Yeah.
And gamblers especially like to talk about, find all the reasons why
why they lost money.
But that's not why they lost the game. But anyway, it's ancient history in a sense, but it'll always be looked back upon as fond years in Buffalo. And it's great that team and those players are now earning the respect that they richly deserve. I mean, they were unbelievably good players. It just... Sometimes life is like that.
Yeah, and again, there's hyper focus on how the Bills handled themselves and handled that game. I don't think, last I checked, that the Giants were sequestered from the second that they beat San Francisco in the NFC Championship game to come back to that game. And you could say the better coaching was done there, that they came up with strategy. It's a missed field goal that decides the outcome. The Bills are in position to win that game, and fate just didn't let it happen. A horrible thing for Scott Norwood. It did result in an amazing story of forgiveness I saw for this community, and let's not lose sight of that. I know we only want to celebrate wins, and we only want to dump on losses or losing or forget about losing. I thought for this community and what the Bills have been for the longest time here, and especially I think at a time when we've needed it most in society, a bonding agent. They've been an incredible bonding agent, right? And I think now more so than ever, how people are brought together at a time when so much pulls us apart. Then though, after that game, and Scott Norwood being at steps of City Hall, and this leads to me. So I'm in Tampa. I'm flying back. My wife and I are flying back from Tampa, and so we're not there for the event.
Most of the local media that went to the Super Bowl could not get back.
We couldn't get back in time for that. But along the way, and once I landed, I see all these messages on my phone, and before I had done a book with Conrad Dobler after his retirement, and I had a literary agent, and the messages are from my about 10, 15 messages from my literary agent saying, somebody, it was Simon & Schuster, wants you to do, I'd done a book for them with Fred Smirlis as well. So I'd done 2 books, both did really well. So there was, that track record, and the literary agent, I get his message. The editor of the book I had done for Simon & Schuster on Fred, he's leaving messages. And the messages was they had watched CNN or whoever nationally had that ceremony, said, there's a book here. There's a book here, and the Bills losing this game. And honestly, it had never crossed my mind. The catch was, you got to turn this book around like really fast. You got a limited amount of time. I had to take a leave of absence from the news and nearly kill myself to stay awake for I don't know how many consecutive days, drinking a lot of coffee to get the book done that was called The Buffalo Bills and the Almost Dream Season.
So you wrote a book?
I did.
I didn't know you wrote any books. See what I did
What a sarcastic man you are.
How many books have you written?
11 that have been published. 12. The one that never saw the light of day was a book with Jack Kemp, and it was going to be leading into his presidential run with Random House. Jack pulled out of the race, as you may recall, and then became the running mate for Bob Dole. And but Jack and I were working on that book for like 2 years, and I've got a manuscript that thick still in a box in a basement.
I thought it was the Bob Koshinski story, because you and I talked for so many years about doing it.
It's in the works.
Come that close.
It's in the works.
One last thing, and please don't go into this, because I got to wrap this up. The amazing thing about those 4 years.
We're in the magical wrap-up part that takes a half an hour.
The Bills fired their general manager after back-to-back Super Bowls, and then still went to another 2 Super Bowls with a new general manager. You don't see that anymore today.
It was very interesting, and again, Bill Polian is the architect.
That's a whole show.
Of that. But it was crazy, and the circumstances that led to it were crazy. But for Bill's sake, he goes ahead and
worked out.
It worked out pretty well for him.
Super Bowl. Vic, thanks so much for being with us again. I want to wish you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving. You got a lot to be thankful for. You're just coming off, your induction into the Italian American Hall of Fame, and that's tremendous. And we're all proud of you.
Thank you very much, Bob.
That's going to do it. We'll be back for our next episode. Yours truly on Nuff Said, and we'll be back. Have yourself a great night and a much better tomorrow.